Thank you everyone for joining another episode of Candor and Conviction. Today, our guest is Daniel Martino. Daniel has started a new organization called the Dissident Project, where he takes speakers to universities and talk about totalitarianism and socialism. He also is doing his PhD in economics from Columbia University, and he is also a graduate fellow of the Manhattan Institute. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Carlos.
I wanted to start by asking you, where are you getting all this time from? I'm seeing you, I'm seeing you going everywhere, man. I believe yesterday you were in DC and you've been talking in different universities. People would say that you are even busier than the president nowadays. So
No, I am definitely busy. So that you know a little bit about what I do. So the Dissident Project is the organization I founded that you mentioned. Dissident, what we do is we send immigrants who lived in socialist and other authoritarian countries to speak at high schools to tell our stories. So we have people from Venezuela, of course, like myself and you, but also people from Cuba, from Zimbabwe, from Iran, from Hong Kong, from Eritrea in Africa. So we have people from many different places, and North Korea, and we all have very different stories. But the common thread is that we all love America and love the freedoms that we have here, and that we need to inculcate those values to the future generation. So I travel to high schools and I manage that organization along with a great team. And at the Manhattan Institute, I do immigration research, which is also my specialty in the PhD in economics. And I also speak for Young America's Foundation, which is the largest conservative college student organization. So that's what brought me to Florida. I'm speaking at Florida Southern College, and that's why I'm here. So it's a lot of things to manage. So I do have to, balance my time well, sleeping in the plane, work sometimes on the road. That's what I do.
yeah, no, definitely are all contributions that are very well appreciated for bringing all the free market values that we believe in. And that you kind of mentioned that something that you and people that are speakers for this student project have is that they all love America. And that's one of the questions that I have is, you clearly are a person that is very capable and very smart guy. Why did you pick to come to America?
I also ask that question to immigrants because I think it's a very important question. When people leave their country, they make two decisions. Number one, they want to leave. But then number two, where do they want to go? And people self-select.
Yeah.
And so the reason I wanted to come to America rather than another place was that I thought that America, number one, was the country where it was least likely to become a socialist country. Among all the other countries in the world, if I had to make a bet that one country wouldn't become socialist, it was the United States. And number two, just this is the country with the most economic opportunities for anyone in every sector. Europe is greatly, it's much poorer than the United States. There's much higher unemployment, much lower earnings. Latin America is all at risk of an authoritarian government at some point, and it's also poorer. And much more unsafe than the rest of the world. And obviously Africa and Asia are not even options. I don't even speak the languages, too far, the culture is very different. And so obviously America really drew me. I had traveled to the US when I was a kid several times. I remember one of the anecdotes that really startled me was in Florida, in a Walmart, where I met a Cuban cashier, right? And I was checking out. And then she was telling me and my parents how she was going to go on a cruise vacation the following weekend with her husband. And I thought, a cashier at a Walmart can go on a cruise ship? Are you kidding me? That's insane. All the cashiers in Venezuela are poor and can barely feed their families.
That just reminded me of, I don't know if you have seen this video going around about this, that there is this girl that is going around asking Venezuelans what their salaries are.
Yes.
And anybody says something in a range between $100 and $150. And then they
per
say,
month, so that people know. That's
yeah,
per month.
100. is per month, and their rent per month is $100. So many of these people that live renting are barely making it to pay the rent, the totality of their salaries, and that really gives a perspective of how bad things are in countries like that, whereas people here actually, I believe they have different issues. They probably have so much access to money that they sometimes overlive themselves, surrounding themselves with a lot of different
They
different
overspend.
ways.
They overspend.
They overspend their money.
They accumulate things that they don't need. That's right.
I think there was an article I saw that somebody that was living paycheck to paycheck with something like $400,000, and it's like,
Yeah.
wow.
Did you listen to Dave Ramsey?
Yeah, I have listened to it.
So what I love the most is the calls, because it's usually high income people that call.
Yeah.
And they're living paycheck to paycheck because they get into stupid debts.
Yeah.
Oh, I got in I bought a $50,000 car.
Yeah.
And now my payment is, $2,000 a month. Like, what? Are you kidding me? $2,000 a month in a car payment?
Yeah.
That's your life savings. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a car. It means that you need to be reasonable with your expenses.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that happens a lot here. But moving on, another topic that I also believe is pretty interesting is what do you see when it comes to immigration in this country? That there are two sides of the coin right now, and is people are either for an open border policy, or people are basically anti-immigration. And where do you find yourself in this debate?
Well, I think the overwhelming majority of people don't support either of those two things. I mean, in the United States, about 30% of the population is either an immigrant or the child of immigrants directly. And then the rest are the descendants of other immigrants too, realistically. Maybe a very tiny minority are Native Americans, but at the end, somebody came to the Americas from somewhere else. Humanity didn't start in this continent. So everybody comes from somewhere. And the question is not, whether we should have immigration or not, but the question is how many, and in what way. And right now, the problem we have is that a lot of people are coming unvetted to the United States, and they're causing a lot of trouble. And I'll give you one anecdote. Last month, somebody who was in the Interpol watch list for terrorism, kidnapping, racketeering, murder, he was shot in Colombia. He was a Venezuelan though, but the country that put him on Interpol was Colombia, because that's where he was committing crimes. He came to the United States in January of 2024, this year, and they let him through. He didn't get away from Border Patrol. Border Patrol caught him. He turned himself in. They didn't even check the Interpol watch list for his face or name.
That's crazy.
He gave his ID, everything. And then suddenly they thought, March, 2 months later, this guy got through. We need to catch him. And they caught him, okay. But if the Border Patrol is not checking Interpol, they're not checking anything.
That's true.
So there are over 2 million people net being allowed into the United States every year under the Biden administration that are not, many of them are like this. Obviously not the majority, not even a huge number of them are terrorists or anything like that. But only one needs to get through to cause a lot of damage. Jose Ibarra, the guy who killed Laken Riley, another illegal immigrant, because he wasn't vetted. Because other policies within the U.S., like the Sanctuary City policies, like the bail reform in New York that allows people to go free pending trial, even if they're violent. Today in New York City, Carlos, if you try to kill somebody with a knife, you will be released pending your trial. You should not be released pending your trial, no matter if you're an immigrant or an American, right? And so I think we need to secure the border in a way that's humane, that's realistic. It's not just, oh, Trump is going to become president and everything's going to be fixed in January 20th. That's not going to happen, and people are going to be very disappointed if that if he becomes president and it doesn't happen. It won't. People need to remember that Congress does need to act. It's a lie that you've been told that we don't need a new law to secure the border. The president can do it himself. Well, we actually do, because enforcing the law costs money.
Yeah.
Homicide is illegal in the United States. What if we defund the police? Is homicide still illegal? Sure. Will we have more homicide? Yes, we will.
Yep.
And that's exactly what's happening in the border. We had a huge rush to the border, in part because of the perception that Biden created.
Yep.
But that's a psychological change. But now to change that, a perception change is not enough. We need real enforcement. And that means detaining people and not releasing them into the country.
Yeah, well, something that it's also happening is that these cities are having people wanting to go there because they are providing all the reasons for them to be there.
Yes.
They are basically inviting them. Something that's happening in New York, and you obviously know this because you were not long ago talking about this on TV, was that they are giving $1,400 to immigrants that go to the state of New York.
Every month. And they also give them free housing. I interviewed a Salvadoran woman who is in one of the New York City shelters a couple of weeks ago. And I asked her, if the government wasn't giving you free housing, would you have come to the United States? And she said, no, I would have stayed working in Mexico.
Yeah.
So we're attracting migrants who are seeking welfare.
Yeah, and isn't that something that countries who are actually asking for people, just to any people to live there, do? I know many countries that actually have a dying population because they are old. Their populations are all old people, and they cannot support them. And what they do is that they give all these incentives for people to go and move there. And it seems like all these sanctuary cities that don't have the laws to actually accommodate any of these people, they don't have the budget to do it. Yeah. And that's precisely what they're doing.
That's a good point. Yeah. You could argue, well, this is a form of incentive to move. Well, that's not really the reason they're doing it. They're doing it because, New York City is governed by socialists. The city council, and I don't mean the mayor. The mayor is not a socialist. But the city council is majority self-identified socialist. And they're the ones who are blocking any restriction on this policy. Yep. Even if the mayor wants to change it, we don't have the city council to do it. Even between moderate Democrats and Republicans, we don't have the majority because the radicals control it. And so that's a big problem. It's the same in other states and cities. And that's attracting more people and the wrong type of person. America has about 9 million job openings that are unfilled. We need people to come to work to the United States. We need more people than the current legal system is handling, because the legal system is very outdated, it's very inefficient, it's very slow, it has caps that haven't been updated since 1990. But we need people with skills that will actually fit the jobs that are available. We don't need random people who are unvetted, potentially criminal, and who are going to be receiving welfare checks. And that's the problem, right? We have a policy in this country where we severely restrict highly skilled immigration of people who speak English, of people who have college degrees, of people who, have degrees and work experience in critical science areas, researchers, physicians. We don't allow almost any of them. And then we just have an open border for the world's welfare recipients.
Yeah, that's a very good analysis of what's happening. And so you think, I don't see a change happening unless the system itself is changed first. And what that means is, I don't believe the American people are gonna want to have more people coming into the country as long as we have a system where people who are not identifiable are just coming through. Yeah. And unless there is first a change on that, I don't think anything else is gonna go
right
through.
The question is how.
Yeah.
Because what many people don't understand, they think that, well, we just build a wall and we turn them back. Well, that's true for Mexicans. You can't send somebody back to Mexico who is Mexican because it's their own country.
Yep.
You cannot send a person that is from another country to Mexico. Once they cross and enter the United States, by the way, they don't have to cross the wall to enter the United States. The United States begins before the wall starts, because we're not building the wall in the Mexican side. We're building it on our side. Okay. So the problem is that under current law, anybody who's physically on the U.S. side of the border, which doesn't mean crossing the wall, can claim asylum and have their case heard. Even if you think it's a case that's going to eventually fail, you don't know for sure, so they need to get it in front of a judge. There are only 700 judges on immigration courts in this country for over 4 million cases. So everybody's put on a backlog of years. And what do you do while they wait the case? Well, you release them, because you can't detain somebody for 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, Trump said, well, we're going to make them wait in Mexico, remain in Mexico. Well, remain in Mexico requires Mexico's consent. They withdrew consent. We cannot implement remain in Mexico anymore. Do you think Mexico is going to agree to have 200,000 people every month more wait on their side of the border? That means that after a year, we're talking about 2.4 million people. That's not going to happen. And because Mexico is not stupid, right? In fact, Mexico is profiting from this.
Yeah,
the Mexican police charges migrants. They make money. The cartels that control the government make money. That's a big part of the problem, Mexico. So I think that the solution is we need to keep people detained on our side of the border. And that will require money, because we will need to build huge detention centers. We will need a lot more immigration judges so that the cases are not decided in 5 years, but in 1 week.
Yeah.
And if we can decide cases in 1 week, most of them will be denied, and then we can fly them back to their home countries.
Yeah, and that also stop incentives,
exactly.
which is
they'll
mainly,
stop coming.
Yeah, they will stop coming when they realize they cannot just explode this system where, as you well said, cases are pending for 10 years. Like in 10 years, there are so many things that people just do and can change. And obviously you have all new laws coming. So you have like TPS laws, and they have like eventually all these people have figured out over time that it's easier just to pretend that you can come here under a different status and probably overstay as long as you need just to find a way to stay in the country.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely a broken, it's a loophole in the system that needs to be assessed.
The issue is that we cannot do it. Republicans can't do this on their own, nor the president can. The right to asylum is codified in U.S. law. Mm-hmm. Democrats are not going to say we're going to abolish the right to asylum.
Yeah, and I don't think it should be abolished.
Well, but it could be abolished if you crossed illegally, not necessarily for people who came on visas and then overstayed or whatever, because that's a very small number of the asylum cases. It's really about the border. Many countries don't allow claiming asylum after entering illegally. Australia, for example, it's a very different law. But that's not going to happen. Democrats are never going to support that, and you need 60 votes in the Senate to change anything in immigration law. So we need to come to a compromise, and a lot of people don't like compromise. And if you don't like compromise, then welcome. You are welcome for the status quo. We can keep having 2 more million people every year. If that's what you don't want to compromise, we need to compromise and give them something in return. Yeah. Maybe it's not amnesty, maybe it's something else. The Senate had come up with a border deal that I think the bill was very good. Everybody bashed it. Oh, it allows 5,000 people a day. Well, right now we're getting 10,000 people a day. And it didn't just allow 5,000. It gave the resources to deport the 5,000 that did come. So, people need to look more into the details of the laws, need to understand what immigration law actually says. Yeah. Most people have never read the Immigration or Nationality Act. And they think that, it's all, we need to enforce the law. Well, not all the laws are good. Mm-hmm. This law is not well written. It has a lot of loopholes, and that's why we have the problem we have today.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said. It's something that needs to change for sure. Going to a different topic.
Okay.
Let's just start talking about this crazy election that is approaching. And it's gonna be same candidates that we had in 2020. Is Biden and Trump again. Who do you see as favorable, and what are your thoughts about them?
Like, who do I think is going to win?
Yeah, we can put it, or at least today. Who do you think is going to
Well, I think if the election was today, Trump would probably win. I think Biden is much more likely to win by November. And the reason is that the economy is what matters most always.
Mm-hmm.
The border is not going to go worse than it already is. If anything, it can only get better. And I think the economy is rapidly improving. Unemployment is low, labor participation is high, wages are rising faster than inflation. And by the time election day comes, it's going to be more loop-sided based on the current trends. And I think that's going to benefit Biden. Inflation has come down. The Fed is doing a good policy, the Federal Reserve. And so I do think that economically it's going to improve for him. And eventually, you have to remember, Trump turns out his own people, but he also turns out Biden's people. Nobody's going to go vote for Biden.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go vote against Donald Trump, which is why if the Republican candidate had been anybody other than Donald Trump, Biden would have lost. Because any other person doesn't turn out the Democrats against them. And so that's a big issue. But, I think everything will depend, though, what happens foreign policy-wise and internationally. Because from now to November, there can be a huge spike in oil prices. Mm-hmm. Then gas prices go up, people feel poorer, and he loses. It's really that easy. Or something can happen in the war in Ukraine. Something can happen in the Middle East. Yeah. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that. I would say, though, that the case that Trump is making for his campaign right now is more to do with the judicial system than anything else. In the sense that whether it's true that he is being attacked judicially, which I believe he is.
He is, yeah.
The Democrats and all the executive branch as well are not doing a good case to say that he is not.
But the median voter doesn't care about that. The median voter cares about the issues that affects them. Right. So if anything, what turns off moderates and independents is the whole judicial problem that Trump is going through. They don't want a president that is going to be convicted of a crime. And so even if the charges are bogus, right, which they are, like the financial fraud in New York, that's bogus. A lot of the cases are bogus. And the cases that are actually strong, like the documents that they took out, are very hypocritical and very badly pursued. Like the one on the documents, I don't know if you know the whole story with the persecutors, that there's a love affair, and now they're being accused of a crime. Like it's a joke. It's like a TV show.
Well, the other thing, though, that comes from those judicial issues is that when something similar was tried to be done with Biden,
exactly,
it was claimed that he was an old and senile old person that could not
because he's too old to be president.
Yeah, but I guess that's kind of the point, that if anything, I think the whole media is overseeing is that they are purposely or not purposely picturing this guy as somebody that is not fit to be in office.
Right. Well, he's not. And you see it in the record. That's the thing. Biden is not really governing.
Yeah.
The people around him are governing. But they'll tell you that's been true in most cases for most presidents. Trump is not really a person who makes all the decisions in his administration. It's the people he appoints.
Sure.
Which is honestly the most important part of electing a president, is who do you think he will appoint? Not just for the cabinet, but also the judiciary, right? That was a big reason Trump won in 2016. Mm-hmm. We needed a conservative Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, and it was done.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. So, I think if you looked at the records, right, of the presidents, Biden's record is really bad.
Yeah.
What is his record? The Afghanistan withdrawal, the invasion of Ukraine, the attacks against Israel. That's internationally. What about domestically? The highest inflation since the 1970s because of his stimulus policies, right? Oh, yeah, the Fed reacted late. But they reacted late because we sent checks to people, which, by the way, Trump bears some blame on that too. But mostly it's Biden. There were many more stimuluses when he became president. And what else? Economically, I mean, the restriction of our energy domestically, the immigration disaster that Biden has promoted, all the attacks through regulations, not just environmental, but against businesses. The gender theory and the liberal judges, I mean, for conservatives, I mean, from the conservative point of view, Biden's presidency has been the worst in many, many decades, perhaps since World War II. Because, at least Clinton had, relatively good economic policies. So, he increased taxes, but he balanced the budget, not bad. Obama had a very good immigration record, even though people were bashing him back then. Obama had, on average, the lowest illegal immigration of any president since, like, the 50s. Less than Trump. So, much more deportations. And who are the other Democrats? Like Jimmy Carter? Yeah, Jimmy Carter was a terrible president in many ways, but he also deregulated the economy.
For sure.
Biden has been a disaster. Trump had a relatively good presidency. I think that should be his pitch. That should be Trump's pitch to voters. But unfortunately, his pitch is, I won the 2020 election, and you should vote for me to achieve vengeance against Biden. That's not going to win, that message.
Yeah, well, that makes me wonder, do you think is Trump during the campaign the same as Trump when he's president? Because that's another debate that people have been talking about, and it seems, and you can see it from a recently, obviously totally disagree with his recent statement about abortions, and saying that he's just going to leave it up to the states, when he was previously claiming that he was the most pro-abortion president because he the most pro-life president because he had all these judges in the Supreme Court, which partially is true, but all I'm saying is it seems that Trump isn't right now playing at the game that whatever it gets him to win the election, he'll do. And I don't believe that's so much of the essence of who he will be as president.
Well, let's think about that. If he really wanted to win the election, he would stop talking about fraud in 2020.
I don't think he can. I think he has made it so I don't think he can do that at this point.
Well, he can. He can just stop talking about it and focus on the issues.
But people will still ask him.
Yeah, they can ask him, but he's pushing it.
Yeah.
So it's not just about winning, it's about his deeply held beliefs. And let's go back to his deeply held beliefs. Trump has never been pro-life. His personal opinion is not pro-life.
Yeah.
He has always been pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage. He has always been a liberal from New York City. Now, that doesn't mean that he is worse than Biden. But we have to understand the facts. Yeah. He was always a guy who was socially liberal from New York. Hanging out with the Hollywood stars, donating to Democrats, being a registered Democrat. That my concern, the federal government is never going to pass a ban on abortion because we don't have the votes in Congress to do that. That's not the issue. The issue is, what is he going to do regulatory-wise, right? When he becomes president, if he does. Is he going to defund Planned Parenthood? Is he going to pursue pro-life policies where he can? I remember when Nikki Haley was running for president, and she said, we're not going to pass an abortion ban because we don't have the vote. So we need to do what we can do. Support adoption, support all these things. Yeah, that's the approach from the president. I understand we have to be realistic. We're not going to ban abortion nationwide. We can't legally with the votes we have. So we have to do everything we can to reduce the number. But Trump doesn't even seem to have that explicit goal. That's what concerns me. It also concerns me that the people who he will appoint will be very bad on immigration, actually. Yeah. Because they might be very good on the border, maybe. He will need to negotiate with Congress. That is, if we win Congress. But the people he will appoint are likely, I think, to also crack down on legal immigration. And I don't mean, anybody doing anything breaking the rules. I'm talking about destroying the highly skilled immigration system. This is something most Americans are not aware of. But when he was president, a lot of policies were implemented, such as, I think the most insane one was the no blanks policy, where if you left a blank space in a place where you should have put a 0 or a non-applicable response, they would deny you, just with the purpose of making people trip and deny their immigration applications. The backlog of processing applications grew. So a lot of bad things were done on the legal immigration system. And if as conservatives we say we're against legal immigration or we're for legal immigration, that's not what happened during the Trump presidency, unfortunately. It was just against all immigration. Yeah. And I'm concerned because I think America benefits tremendously from legal immigration, especially from immigrants who are highly educated, who speak English. And I want more of that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that makes all sense. And I think that it's also important to remark that highly skilled immigration or certain immigration is different than other immigration waves that we're seeing because of the rise on welfare.
Right.
Because those are not good immigrations.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some forms of legal immigration that aren't necessarily good either. For example, Americans can sponsor their parents to come to the United States. And usually that's people who are in their late 50s, early 60s. Who will work a few years and then get Social Security and Medicare. So they're going to be net burdens on the government. But then we severely limit work visas. We limit a lot of employment-based green cards that actually are younger people or middle career people who are making a lot of money and would pay a lot in taxes and not collect benefits or collect much less. And that's the type of immigration we need to expand. And unfortunately, that's not what he did when he was president. On trade, right? On trade, Trump and Biden are basically the same. Against free trade, for tariffs, for restrictions.
Would you like to say something? And I saw that you actually supported this, but I would like you to expand on. And Nayib Bukele doing or incentivizing engineers and other STEM fields to go to the country. It was 5,000 people, which translates to 90,000 here.
So Bukele, the president of El Salvador, had announced these policies where 5,000. He's going to allow 5,000 highly skilled professionals to immigrate to El Salvador, additionally to the current immigration system that they have, so that they can, practice their profession, make money there, pay taxes there, create jobs, and if El Salvador's population is about 5.4 million people, which means that if you translated that to the United States of 340 million people, that would be 266,000 visas for the United States. The number of actual employment-based visas we have annually hasn't changed since 1990, and it's effectively about 120,000 between EB1, 2, and 3. Those are the three main employment-based visa categories. And that includes the spouses and children. So we're talking about El Salvador, who a lot of people on the right here admire, is actually pursuing highly skilled immigration at a level that is more than twice of the United States. Probably 4 times, because the 5,000 number doesn't include family members for El Salvador. So we need to increase highly skilled immigration. We need to limit illegal and low-skilled legal immigration. That's kind of like what I do at the Manhattan Institute on our policy. We call it selectionism, meaning we want to select the immigrants who come to the United States, and we want to select a lot of good ones.
Yeah.
And we don't want bad ones.
Yeah, I think that's the goal of immigration. It should be being able to select who comes and who doesn't. And I think that's very relevant today, where we cannot do that. And we have seen all over the country how the implications of not being able to identify those people are just destroying the cities. Like, I mean, we're importing some people that we don't want here. And if we were able to identify, we could easily say, don't enter.
Or at least deport criminals,
Yeah,
I mean, the whole thing with sanctuary cities is that if you commit a crime and you're a non-citizen, they won't report you to ICE. But if you shoplift, because they say, well, but we don't want to deport non-violent offenders. Well, there's a lot of offenses that are terrible and they're non-violent. Like if you stole something from a store and they didn't catch you, you didn't have a gun or anything, but they caught you in the camera and they charged you with a crime, they won't call ICE on you. Sorry, but the United States should not allow shoplifters to remain in this country.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem like an unreasonable position to me.
No.
What about drunk driving?
Yeah.
Look, I had a conversation with a guy in the subway. This was St. Patrick's Day weekend, and this guy, he seemed Ecuadorian, and indeed he was. He spilled some beer on my shoe, and he didn't know I spoke Spanish, and I said, "Don't worry about it," in Spanish. And I asked him, "Are you from Ecuador?" And he said, "Yeah." He kept talking a lot. He wasn't very drunk, so he talked a lot. And then he started telling me about Ecuador, and I said, "Oh, I know a lot of Venezuelans have gone to Ecuador." And he says, "Yes, they have ruined our country." And I tell him, "Oh, really? I'm Venezuelan." And he's like, "Oh, but you are so well dressed."
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
so like
crazy.
Venezuelans can dress. And then he goes on and says, what happened is that they started making less money than we did. And so I lost my job and they underbid our wages. And so I just told him, don't you think that that's what a lot of people think about you here? Now, look, it's not true that immigration in the numbers we have is affecting wages negatively. It's affecting us negatively in other ways, through welfare, through housing costs. But wages, the economic evidence isn't there. But that's what he said, and that's what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, but we don't come here to cause trouble. We are good people, he says. Well, but he's drinking in an open container, drunk in a public space, which is illegal.
Yeah.
So
it's the definition of what he is
that
saying that
is
destroys the country.
Exactly. So he is this, I'm not saying he's terrible or anything. I'm not saying that he's a bad
But
person
he doesn't
even.
have a moral ground to say that.
But the United States should not be filled with people who are going to be openly drinking in public transportation and being drunk in the street. That's not the kind of America we want.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. Think thank you so much for the immigration topic. I'm glad to talk about that with you because I know that you're doing your research on that and talking a little bit about where there's some truths and false statements about immigration is refreshing. We're gonna move from America, talking a little bit about Venezuela. Yesterday you were in a panel in DC.
Yes.
And where you guys got to talk about different topics, and I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit what was that about.
Well, this was set up by an organization called My Voice Counts. I had recently heard about them. It's organized by Venezuelans who are seeking to allow Venezuelans to fix their legal status in the United States, who are currently pending asylum and things like that. And they're good people. We had a panel. I was participating on the immigration side, but also on the situation in Venezuela. Davide Smolansky was there in the panel. And then, of course, on the immigration side, there was David Beer and Simon Hawkinson. David is from the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. And Simon is from the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, like the Manhattan Institute, where I'm affiliated with. But, our philosophies on immigration are different. And, it was a very good panel. Venezuelans are the most highly educated Hispanic group in the United States. It's also the fastest growing immigrant group in the country. Historically, we have been a huge benefit to the United States because of the fact of being highly educated, productive members of society. But it's also a bigger issue now because a lot of the people coming illegally are Venezuelan. Not a plurality, nowhere near that number. It's mostly still Mexicans and Central Americans, but more are Venezuelans than they used to be. And so it was an interesting conversation. And, I think one thing that did come out that I think is important is that it's probably going to get worse. Because after Venezuela has fake elections on July 28th, a lot of people have still hope in Venezuela. I don't understand it. I lost my hope a long time ago, and that's why I left. But a lot of people do have hope. And after July 28th, I feel like a lot of people will lose it.
Yeah.
And when they lose it, it's going to trigger a huge migration wave, and an additional one.
Yeah.
Remember, Venezuela is already the largest refugee crisis in the world. It's going to grow even more. I think that at least 1 more million people will leave Venezuela. And they are probably going to head to the United States because Colombia is in a terrible disaster. Ecuador is too. Chile is too. So the other options are less attractive, and the United States is more attractive.
Yeah, it's very interesting also what's happening in South America. It's like it's polarizing in such a way, like Javier Milei winning the elections, and then you have Petro in Colombia, who is probably the most communist person that you can find around the world, and you can see the polarization going on in South America, and I think something that is gonna define what leadership you're gonna have in South America are the elections here in the U.S. Because that's whether you like or dislike the candidates, it's very clear that Biden has a position of not intervening anywhere.
Yeah.
And Trump has a position of wanting to be friends with anybody who's his friend.
That is very true. But during the Trump administration, we did see a very good policy towards Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, of sanctioning those regimes that Biden pulled back, and it was a huge mistake.
Yeah.
And now even Mexico is trying to blackmail the United States, saying, if you need to lift sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba if you want us to help you with immigration, and you need to give us $20 billion. Yeah. Are you kidding me? That's what happens when the United States is seemed weak.
Yeah.
We cannot be seemed weak. But the problem is that Trump also, he did the sanctions, but that's it. We need much more than that. We need to approach those countries that are our allies in Latin America and help them prosper.
Yeah.
We need free trade with Latin American countries so that we can, and I'm not talking about Cuba, Nicaragua, or Venezuela, we need to sanction them, but and make those regimes suffer, meaning the governments. But we need the populations of Brazil, of Argentina, of Chile, of Peru to prosper so that those countries flourish. And then the United States will flourish as a result too. Will reduce pressure on the border. A lot of good things can come out of that. So my fear is that with Trump, it will only be words. I mean, he pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership when he became president. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would have given us free trade with much more with Mexico, with Peru, with Chile, with Colombia, with Ecuador, with Panama. And he pulled out. We needed more of that to counter China. We needed more of that to help Latin America and to help us. And so I don't think in the next presidential term, no matter who wins, things are going to improve much. But I do agree with you that if Trump were to win, that would be seen as a positive thing for the Latin American right.
Yeah, well, something that caught my attention about at least the last presidency of Trump is that in Venezuelan modern history and the dictatorship that we've been through, I don't believe there has been any other leader that has helped Venezuelans to get out of the regime as much as Trump did. The only reason why we didn't get out of the Venezuelan regime was because of Venezuelan oppositions.
Yeah.
But not because of lack of help from
I agree.
the
Well,
Trump government.
exactly. Yeah, I agree. I think the Venezuelan opposition itself is a disaster. I think it's obvious now that they want to participate in the elections. And I mean, look, I've always been a fan of Maria Corina. I used to be part of her party. I then left because I didn't feel like I was going to be helping anymore after 2019. So it wasn't worth the time because I didn't think there was a chance anymore. Because we had the perfect environment in 2019. We had friendly administrations in the US, in Brazil, and Colombia. Now we have unfriendly administrations in the three countries. Not just in the United States is unfriendly, but in Brazil and Colombia, it's collaborators of the Venezuelan regime. It's like dangerous people, crooks, terrorists, narco-traffickers, all the bad things you can imagine is Petro and Lula in Brazil. I mean, Lula is stacking up the Supreme Court in Brazil to imprison Bolsonaro.
Well, I don't know if you saw the new Judge Alexander, not the new judge, but the news about the Judge Alexander in Brazil. Yeah, just basically threatening X or Twitter, saying that they needed to ban users. They needed to ban people who were in the parliament. They needed to ban people who were reporters that were renaming the country.
Well, I hope Elon Musk responds banning the Supreme Court from Twitter.
That would be amazing.
So that
it looks like
they deserve it.
Yeah, it looks like one of his moves. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I would share that
just do
very
it to
much.
troll them. I hope so.
Yeah.
And what are they gonna do? That's not a Brazilian company. They can't do anything to Elon Musk. Are they gonna censor the internet? Yeah, sure. Then make Brazil a dictatorship. Let's see how that goes. Then maybe Brazil should be sanctioned by the United States.
Yeah.
And so, there's a big battle in America for freedom. There's a big battle worldwide for freedom. It's always been totalitarianism against freedom. It's why China and Russia support these regimes in Latin America. And it's why, we need free people around the world need to unite and understand that our common enemy is these authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
And that they're working together. Iran works with Russia, who works with China, who works with North Korea, with Venezuela, with Cuba, Nicaragua. And we need to band together and understand, like we did in the Cold War, that our ultimate goal should be democratization. I'm not sure how, what's the means, but we need to have a goal in mind, and that's democratization and liberty.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think that all was great, and the only thing or the last topic I want to finish this with is, we touched about the justice system and how awful it's been for countries. I mean, in Venezuela, in the early days with Chavez, they used the Supreme Court they packed the court and used it against the people. We are seeing the same thing in Brazil. And it seems like there are some intentions from Democrats to do the same here. So I think we need to be very vigilant about that. But what do you see? What do you think about that specifically? Like, do you think stacking the courts as something that is possible here in the U.S.?
I mean, it is legally possible. I think that was probably the biggest omission or mistake in the Constitution, was to not cap the number of Supreme Court justices or fix it at 9 or whatever number they wanted. Because right now, with 51 votes in the Senate, or really 50 plus the Vice President, and half of the House of Representatives, if they really wanted, they could just abolish the filibuster and appoint more Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
They could do that today. Well, they can now because they don't have the majority in the House. But if they did have the majority after November, they could do that. Republicans could do it too. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah.
That would be a big problem. And it's certainly how you would be able to destroy this country, because the Supreme Court can reinterpret plain words in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Bukele did it in El Salvador. It's why I don't like Bukele. Bukele packed the Supreme Court of El Salvador, and they reinterpreted the basic language in the Constitution that said he could not run for re-election. And then he ran for re-election instead of modifying the Constitution. They could do that here too. They could read the amendment of the Constitution that bars the president from having more than 2 terms, running for 2 terms, to say, no, it doesn't, even though it says in plain English, because they are the ultimate authority of what the Constitution says. And so we need to be very vigilant about the courts. I think that's our Achilles heel. But I'm optimistic. The United States has a lot of freedom-loving people. We have a very strong First Amendment, a very strong Second Amendment, very strong protections against searches and seizing of property by the government. We have a very good federalist system where the states have more power than in many other parts of the world. And I think that division of powers has really allowed us to flourish and prevented tyranny in the United States for now nearly 250 years. So I'm optimistic in the long run.
Yeah, no, I mean, I subscribe to that optimism. I might have some disagreements about Bukele, but I know that you have had disagreements with others before about that as well. So, well, I think we can finish it there. Something else you want to say for people probably following your project?
Yeah, well, people can follow me at Daniel DiMartino on Twitter, on Instagram, just my first name Daniel, then my last name DiMartino all together. And if you're a teacher, if you're an educator, a parent, a high school student, and you want to bring somebody from an authoritarian country to your high school or middle school to speak at no cost, you can go to dissidentproject.org. You can also support us there if you want to donate or you want to share it with a friend, dissidentproject.org.
Yeah, and well, this was Daniel DiMartino joining us in Candor and Conviction. I hope that you like this video, subscribe, and thank you so much for being with us in another episode. See you next time.